My wife was paralyzed by a stroke 6 years ago. The woman who once ran 3 companies couldn't lift a spoon. Yesterday, my son and I brought her to a new rehab specialist. The moment my son stepped into the hallway to take a call, the specialist gripped my wrist and whispered, "Keep your wife away from your son. The tremors in her hand aren't from the stroke." Before I could ask what that meant, the door swung open. My son walked back in, holding syringe. My wife was paralyzed by a stroke 6 years ago. The woman who once commanded 3 boardrooms across the Lehigh Valley could not lift a spoon or speak a single word. And yesterday, my son and I brought her to a new rehabilitation specialist at a clinic in Allentown that smelled like floor wax and quiet defeat. My name is Virgil Prescott. I am 67 years old, and for 4 decades I designed highway bridges across Pennsylvania, the kind of work where a single miscalculation kills people. I retired 3 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but because my hands started trembling over the drafting table, and I refused to let pride build a structure that might fail. Engineers do not get second chances. Neither do husbands. You spend 40 years building bridges that hold 10,000 cars a day, and you think you understand what it means to carry weight. You do not. Not until the woman you love cannot carry her own hand to her face. Leona Prescott, 65, sat in her wheelchair beside me in the therapy room at the Lehigh Valley Rehabilitation Center. Her eyes were open but unfocused, aimed at a spot on the far wall where the paint had bubbled slightly near the ceiling vent. I used to think she was staring at nothing. I have since changed my mind about that. Griffin Prescott, my 40-year-old son, stood on the other side of his mother's wheelchair in an immaculate charcoal suit. Every inch the devoted child who had sacrificed his consulting schedule to accompany us. His hand rested on Leona's shoulder with the practiced tenderness of a man who knew exactly how the gesture looked from across the room. His phone buzzed in his pocket the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Corrine Whitaker was 44, a rehabilitation therapist with steady hands and the kind of clinical gaze that missed nothing. She had been assigned to my wife's case only 3 weeks ago, and in that time she had said very little beyond clinical observations. Today, though, something was different. She studied the monitor beside Leona's chair the way I used to study stress fractures on bridge decks, not reading the data, but interrogating it. Griffin's phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen. "Dad, it's the office. I'll be right back, 2 minutes," he said, already moving toward the door. He squeezed Leona's shoulder before he left. The squeeze lasted exactly the right amount of time, not too brief, not too long. Practiced. The door clicked shut behind him. What happened next took 4 seconds. I have replayed those 4 seconds more times than I can count. Corinne's head snapped toward the closed door. She held still for 1 beat, listening to Griffin's footsteps recede down the hallway. Then she crossed the room in 2 strides, gripped my wrist hard enough to leave a mark, and leaned so close I could smell the coffee on her breath. "Keep your wife away from your son," she whispered. The tremors in her hand are not from the stroke. How do you process a sentence that turns your only son into a suspect in 3 seconds flat? You do not. Your brain locks. Your lungs forget their function. The room contracts to the size of the whisper still vibrating against your ear. I opened my mouth to respond, and nothing came out. Not a word. Not a sound. Not even the breath I had been holding since her fingers closed around my wrist. Corinne released me and stepped back to her monitor. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk and stared at the screen as if the previous 4 seconds had not occurred. As if she had not just detonated the foundation of my family with 11 words. I looked at Leona. She sat motionless in her wheelchair, eyes aimed at the same spot on the wall. But for the first time in 6 years, I wondered whether that stillness was illness or survival, whether the woman behind those eyes was absent or hiding. For 6 years, I had watched my wife disappear into a silence so deep I forgot she once filled every room she entered. I had blamed the stroke. I had blamed medicine. I had blamed God on the nights when blaming medicine was not enough. Not once, not a single time in 2,190 days had I blamed my son. An engineer knows the sound a support cable makes the instant before it snaps, a high, thin whine that most people mistake for silence. Stand in that rehabilitation room with Corinne's warning still burning on my skin. I heard that sound for the first time inside my own chest. The door handle turned. Griffin walked back through the door holding a small amber vial in his left hand, his thumb pressed firmly over the label. He smiled at me, that warm, practiced, beautiful smile. All sorted. Dad, sorry about that, the markets wait for no one. He slipped the vial into his coat pocket with the ease of a man pocketing his keys. Routine, unremarkable. Except that in the fraction of a second before the vial disappeared, I saw Corinne's knuckles turn white against the edge of her desk. Whatever was in that vial, my son did not want anyone to read its name. I forced the words out before my throat could close around them. What is that, son? Griffin glanced down at his coat pocket as if he had already forgotten the vial existed. The gesture was seamless. A flicker of confusion, then a warm chuckle. Then the answer arriving with the polished cadence of a man who had rehearsed it. It's a new neurosupplement, Dad. Dr. Harmon recommended it imported, very expensive. I handle the dosing so the staff doesn't have to worry about it. He said it the way he said everything, with enough confidence to make you feel foolish for asking. But I had spent 40 years reading stress reports, and I knew what data looked like when someone dressed it up to pass inspection. I had logged every pill, every capsule, every milligram that entered my wife's body for 2,191 days. Yellow legal pads filled with dates, dosages, and pharmacy labels stacked in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. I could tell you the milligram count of her blood thinner on any given Tuesday in 2023. That vial was not on any list I had ever written. It was not the vial that made my stomach drop. It was the speed with which he hit it. The thumb over the label in the doorway, the smooth pivot into his pocket, the instant our eyes locked, these were not the movements of a man carrying a supplement. These were the movements of a man managing a secret. Dr. Harmon? I repeated. You haven't met him. He's in Philadelphia, cutting edge, very exclusive. I set it up 6 months ago. Griffin buttoned his coat and kissed Leona's forehead. Ready to head home, Mom. 6 months. He had been giving my wife an unlisted substance for 6 months and had never mentioned it to me. I was her husband. I was her emergency contact. I was the man who sat beside her bed every night, reading aloud from the same novel she had been halfway through the day the stroke took her voice. Because I could not accept that she was not still listening. And my son had decided I did not need to know. I said nothing more at the clinic. I helped load Leona's wheelchair into the van. I buckled her seatbelt the way I always did, checking the shoulder strap twice, adjusting the headrest, my hands performing the rituals of care while my mind disassembled everything I thought I understood about family. The drive home took 22 minutes along a stretch of Highway 222 I had helped engineer 3 decades earlier. I knew every expansion joint, every drainage slope, every patch of repaved asphalt where a subsurface crack had worked its way to the surface. A bridge does not collapse all at once. It sends warning signals for months, microfractures in the steel, hairline shifts in the concrete, and you either catch them or you bury the dead. I had been missing the fractures in my own house. Griffin followed behind us in his sedan, and in the silence of the van, I began counting backward. Not days, patterns. The nights Leona slept so deeply that I could not rouse her for evening medication. The mornings her hands trembled worse than usual, her eyes glassier, her skin carrying a faint chemical sweetness I had attributed to the clinical lotions the nursing aide applied. I had kept those notes too, not because I suspected anything, but because engineers document. It is what we do. It is who we are. 3 clusters emerged. October, November. the first 2 weeks of January. Each cluster aligned with weeks Griffin had visited Leona alone. Weeks I had been at dental appointments or physical therapy for my shoulder, or the one weekend I drove to Pittsburgh for my college roommate's funeral. Every deep sleep night fell inside a window when my son had unsupervised access to my wife. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I had spent 6 years mourning a woman who was sitting 3 feet behind me. 6 years speaking softly to her, reading to her, holding her hand in the blue light of hospital rooms, believing she had retreated to a place I could not reach. And now a therapist I had known for 3 weeks was telling me the distance between us might not be medical at all. It might be chemical. It might be deliberate. I adjusted the rear-view mirror out of habit. Leona was staring straight at me. Not the blank, unfocused drift I had grown accustomed to over 6 hollow years. This was direct, deliberate. Her dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made the steering wheel slip in my sweating hands. My breath caught. The van drifted toward the rumble strip, and I corrected without looking away from the mirror. Because something in her gaze was more important than the road. It lasted only a few seconds. Then her head slowly turned back toward the window, and the familiar stillness resettled over her features like snow covering footprints. But those seconds rewrote everything I thought I knew about my wife's condition. Because what I saw in Leona's eyes was not confusion, not vacancy, not the fog of a damaged brain drifting through its own wreckage. It was recognition. And behind the recognition, something I had not seen in her face since the morning of the stroke. Fear. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark beside my wife's bed, replaying those 2 seconds in the rearview mirror, the way her eyes had found mine, deliberate and sharp, before the fog rolled back in, and she turned away. Fear. I had seen fear in the face of a woman I was told could no longer feel anything at all. By morning, I had made a decision. I would say nothing to Griffin. I would watch. I would document. I would do what I had done for 40 years. On bridges that people trusted with their lives, I would inspect. But the inspection began sooner than I planned. Nadine Prescott, Griffin's 37-year-old wife, appeared at the kitchen door that evening, holding a manila folder and an apologetic smile. She was a slender woman with careful posture and a voice that always sounded like it was asking permission to exist. I had liked Nadine from the day Griffin brought her home 8 years ago. She was kind to Leona in the quiet, consistent way that cannot be faked, brushing her hair, adjusting her pillows, reading to her on afternoons when I was too tired to hold the book. "I was just picking up some of Griffin's shirts from the upstairs closet," she said, setting the folder on the kitchen counter. "Oh, and those just routine updates the facility needs. Griffin said you'd sign them whenever you had a chance. No rush." I opened the folder after she left. 3 forms. Medical proxy authorization documents that would grant Griffin expanded decision-making power over Leona's care, including the authority to approve or reject treatment changes without my co-signature. In 40 years of bridge work, I learned that the most dangerous cracks are the ones hidden beneath fresh paint, the kind that look like maintenance but are actually concealment. These forms were fresh paint, routine updates, she had called them. The language buried in paragraph 4 was anything but routine. It would remove me from the approval chain entirely. I photographed each page with my phone. I did not sign them. I placed them back in the folder exactly as Nadine had left them, face down, slightly askew, as if I had barely glanced at the contents. Then I went to Leona's room and sat beside her in the dim glow of the nightlight. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hands rested on the blanket, palms down, the left one trembling faintly the way it always did. I placed my hand over hers. "I will find out what is happening. Leona," I whispered. "I promise you that." She did not respond, but she did not pull away. And in a new calculus of my suspicion, even that absence of withdrawal meant something. The next morning I made breakfast. scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee. The same meal I had cooked every day since Leona's stroke because the routine was the only architecture I had left. Griffin arrived at 8:15, kissed his mother's forehead in the living room, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I poured his coffee and set the mug in front of him. Then I leaned back in my chair and did something I had never done before. I lied to my son's face. "Remind me again, so what was that new vitamin you brought for your mother yesterday?" I scratched my temple. My memory isn't what it used to be. When did my son learn to lie with such architectural precision, laying each word like a brick in a wall designed to keep me on the outside? "Neurovital Plus, Dad," he said without hesitation. "Imported from a clinic in Switzerland. Costs us $1,400 a month, but it's the only thing keeping her tremors manageable. You don't need to worry about it." His voice was warm, his posture was relaxed, his eyes held mine with the steady confidence of a man telling the absolute truth, but his hands told a different story. His knuckles were bone white around the coffee mug, the tendons rigid beneath skin that had gone pale from the pressure. His voice said $1,400 a month out of love. His knuckles said something else entirely. I nodded slowly, the way a retired man nods when the world has gotten too complicated for him. I let my shoulders sag. I let my eyes drift. "Good," I murmured. "Good. You take such good care of her, Griffin." He watched me for 3 seconds too long, measuring, deciding. Then he stood abruptly and carried his mug to the sink. "I need to run," he said, his back to me. "Going to talk to the therapist about adjusting Mom's schedule. Some of these sessions are doing more harm than good." The therapist, Corinne Whitaker, the woman who had gripped my wrist and whispered the warning that was still echoing through every room in this house. Griffin grabbed his car keys and strode toward the front door without looking back. He was not going to adjust a therapy schedule. He was going to silence the only medical professional who had dared to whisper the truth. And I was the one who had given him the reason to do it. Because I had asked about the vial, and he had calculated exactly who might have prompted the question. The front door closed, his engine started, gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled out of the driveway. I picked up my phone and found Corinne Whitaker's number on the clinic's website. If my son was driving toward her with intent, I needed to get there first, even if the only bridge I could build in time was a phone call. I waited until Griffin's car disappeared around the corner of Shimmerville Road. Then I locked the front door, walked to my study, and called Corinne Whitaker from the landline, the one Griffin never thinks to check because he believes no one under 70 uses a landline anymore. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a woman who had been expecting this call and dreading it in equal measure. "Mr. Prescott, I can't talk long." "The vial my son brought yesterday," I said. "He told me it was something called Neurovital Plus, imported from Switzerland. Said you were aware of it." Silence. Then a single exhale. "I have never prescribed anything called Neurovital Plus," she said. "That name does not exist in any formulary I have access to. Mr. Prescott, I have never heard of it. No legitimate neurological supplement carries that branding." The room tilted. Not physically, I have stood on bridge catwalks in 40-mile-per-hour crosswinds without losing my balance. But the ground beneath the assumptions I had built my life on shifted in a way I could feel in my teeth. "What do I do?" I asked. "Start writing everything down," Corinne said. "Every pill, every liquid, every time someone other than you gives her anything. Date, time, who administered it. Like an inspection log. Let me tell you something about documentation. In 40 years of bridge work, I never once regretted writing something down. But I have spent the rest of my life regretting the things I failed to record, the cracks I glanced at and thought were cosmetic. The readings I rounded down because the numbers were close enough. Close enough kills people. It almost killed my wife. And please," Corinne added, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "do not tell your son that I called. The line went dead. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, the phone still warm in my hand. Then I stood and walked to the filing cabinet in Leona's room. The bottom drawer held what I needed: 6 years of therapy records, discharge summaries, and medication logs organized by quarter in manila folders I had labeled in my own handwriting. I carried the entire stack to my desk and spread them across the surface like blueprints. This is what engineers do when something fails. We do not guess. We do not speculate. We pull the records and we read the data until it tells us where the fracture started. I was looking for anomalies episodes that deviated from Leona's baseline. It took less than an hour to find them. 3 documented incidents across 6 years, each described in clinical shorthand by different attending nurses. October 2021 seizure, like tremors, unexplained, resolved within 12 hours. March 2023, sudden respiratory depression requiring supplemental oxygen overnight. November 2024, acute cognitive decline lasting 48 hours, attributed to medication interaction, though no medication had been changed. A single data point is an anomaly. 2 are a coincidence. 3 are a structural failure waiting to be named. I pulled my personal calendar from the desk drawer, the pocket-sized week at a glance I had carried since 1987, the kind they stopped making a decade ago. Every appointment, every trip, every day I was away from this house was written in pencil on its pages. I found October 2021. I had been in Pittsburgh that week for my college roommate's bypass surgery. Griffin had visited Leona alone on Tuesday and Wednesday. March 2023. I had been at a 3-day dental implant procedure in Philadelphia. Griffin had taken Leona to a solo therapy session on the 2nd day. November 2024. I had spent that weekend at a retirement dinner for a colleague in Harrisburg. Griffin had the house to himself for 72 hours. I wanted desperately to find a 4th explanation, one that would let me keep my son and my sanity in the same sentence. I checked every other variable I could think of. Seasonal patterns, medication refill dates, nursing staff dates, visiting hours at the rehab center. Nothing correlated, nothing even came close. Only Griffin. 3 incidents, 3 solo visits, 3 times my son was alone with my wife, and something went catastrophically wrong within hours. I stared at the dates until the numbers blurred, and I waited for the data to rearrange itself into something I could live with. It did not. Data never does. That is the cruelty and the mercy of numbers. They do not care what you want them to say. I closed the last folder and laid the 3 dates side by side on my desk like evidence tags. The house was silent, except for the tick of the hallway clock and the faint hum of Leona's oxygen concentrator in the next room. Outside. The January light was already failing, the sky turning the color of old steel over the roofline of the garage where I used to teach Griffin to change a tire. I reached for the phone. There was only one person left in this world I trusted enough to show these numbers to. A man who had spent 40 years reading falsified documents the way I read stress fractures in concrete. I had not spoken to Murray Blackwell in over a year, but tonight I was going to ask him to help me prove that my own son was slowly destroying my wife. I dialed his number from memory. Some things you never forget, no matter how long the silence between them. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and river fog. I sat in a booth at Kellner's watching the Lehigh River Bridge through condensation on the window, tracing the expansion joints with my eyes the way I had done on 100 inspection walks. Things designed to hold together can be engineered to come apart. I was still thinking about that when Murray Blackwell slid into the booth across from me. Murray was 69 years old, broad shoulders gone soft beneath a flannel shirt, reading glasses perched on a nose broken twice in college rugby. He had retired 5 years ago from 30 years as an investigator with the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office. But retirement had not dulled him. It had only removed the leash. He was my oldest friend, 41 years, since we met at a zoning board hearing in 1985, and the only person I knew who could look at a document the way I looked at a bridge and tell you exactly where the weight was being carried wrong. The waitress refilled his cup without asking. He folded his napkin into a perfect square and set it beside his saucer. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. The vial, the fabricated supplement name, Corinne's whispered warning, the therapy logs, and the 3 incidents that mapped onto Griffin's solo visits with 0 deviation. The proxy forms Nadine had left on my counter. I laid it all out while Murray listened without interrupting, a skill I noticed most people lose within a year of retirement. Murray had kept it sharp as a blade. When I finished, he asked 3 questions, each one cut deeper than the last. "Has Griffin ever had financial trouble before?" I hesitated. His consulting firm had struggled 2 years ago. He had borrowed against the house. Who benefits if Leona's recovery stalls? The answer sat in my throat like a stone. Griffin managed her finances. Griffin controlled her medical appointments. Griffin held the power of attorney I had signed in a hospital corridor while my wife was being intubated. Murray paused to order pie, cherry, no ice cream, and for a moment the absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. Here I was describing the possible poisoning of my wife, and my oldest friend was selecting dessert. But that was Murray. He thought in sequences, not emotions, and pie was how he cleared the buffer between listening and analysis. "Where's the original power of attorney?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Then I closed it. Because the truth was I had never read it, not properly. I had signed it the day of Leona's stroke with Griffin standing beside me holding a clipboard and a pen, and I had never looked at the document again. Murray folded his napkin a second time. "There's something else," he said. 3 years ago, a colleague of mine at the DA's office flagged a complaint involving a consulting firm disputed elder care trust, suspicious financial transfers. The complaint was withdrawn before anyone could investigate. The firm's name was Prescott Allied Consulting. My stomach dropped through the booth. "I didn't connect it until you called tonight," Murray said quietly. "But your son's name was on the filing." He gripped my wrist across the table. 41 years I've known you. You don't call me unless the math stops adding up." I nodded. The math had stopped 3 days ago. I drove home through freezing rain along Route 222, the windshield wipers beating a metronome rhythm against the glass. I passed the Emmaus exit sign, and a thought surfaced, unbidden, Emmaus. Named for the road where disciples recognized someone they thought they knew. I wondered when I had stopped recognizing my own son. At home, I unlocked the fireproof filing cabinet in my study. The key sat on my keychain next to a miniature spirit level, an engineer's talisman I had carried for decades. The cabinet's label was in Leona's handwriting, her school teacher cursive still elegant after all these years. Important, do not digitive. I pulled out the power of attorney and read it properly for the first time. Standard boilerplate through 2 pages, then page 3. A clause granting Griffin interim discretionary authority over medical and financial decisions, language broader than anything I remembered agreeing to. Broader than any POA I had ever encountered in 40 years of signing contracts. The notary signature read, T. Kessel, Notary Public, Lehigh County. I did not recognize the name. I checked the notarization date and my hands went still. January 14th, the day of Leona's stroke. The document had been notarized while I was sitting in the emergency room waiting area, and Griffin was supposedly handling the insurance paperwork. My phone buzzed, a text from Griffin. "Mom had a good day. PT says she's improving. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at the text, then at the POA, then back at the text. I did not reply. I set the document down and pressed both palms flat on the desk, the way I used to steady myself on bridge catwalks when the wind kicked up. Then I photographed every page, hands steady because Murray had told me to document everything. The last thing I noticed was the watermark in the footer. Faint but legible, a legal service logo from a company called Quick Legal Pro. Not our family attorney. Not any attorney. A template mill. Griffin had this document ready the day his mother's brain bled. The question was whether ready meant prepared or premeditated. I had never heard of Quick Legal Pro. But Murray would know how to find out who had. I had not slept. I sat at the kitchen table since 3 in the morning, the photographs of the power of attorney glowing on my phone screen like evidence tags at a crime scene. Murray had promised to run the notary's commission number first thing, but first thing was still hours away, and the silence of my own house had become unbearable. So I did what I have always done when the world stops making sense. I went to my study, opened the supply closet, and pulled out a blank field inspection notebook, the same brand I had used for 4 decades of bridge work. Black hardcover, grid-ruled pages, acid-free paper rated to last a century. I had filled 67 of these notebooks over my career. Each one had saved lives by catching what others missed. This one would be different. This one was for my wife. I sat at the kitchen table and built a template on the first page. Date, time, medication administered, dosage, who administered it, Leona's observable condition pupil response, hand tremor severity, verbal attempts, sleep depth. I designed the columns the way I used to design inspection checklists, comprehensive enough to catch anomalies, simple enough to maintain under pressure. Every structural failure I ever investigated started with one measurement someone decided not to write down. I was not going to make that mistake with Leona. I opened the bathroom cabinet where Griffin's amber vial had sat 2 days ago. The shelf was empty. Not rearranged empty. Every legitimate prescription bottle remained in its place, lined up in the order I had organized them months ago. But the vial was gone. Someone had entered this house between yesterday evening and this morning and removed the one piece of physical evidence that connected my son to an unlisted substance. A bridge does not collapse without warning. It telegraphs failure in hairline cracks that only someone looking for them would see. I was looking now. I photographed every remaining pill bottle with my phone front label, back label, lot number, expiration date. 14 bottles in total. I cross-referenced each one against the prescription list Corinne had included in Leona's therapy file. All 14 matched. Nothing extra. Nothing missing, except the thing that should never have been there in the first place. Griffin will expect emotion, I told myself. He will expect his 67-year-old father to stumble through grief and confusion, to ask trembling questions that can be deflected with warmth and patience. He will not expect data. He will not expect the methodical documentation of a man who spent his life ensuring that structures meant to protect people actually did. I wrote the date at the top of the second page. I noted the missing vial, the time I discovered the absence and the condition of the cabinet. Then I carried the notebook to Leona's recovery room. She was asleep. Her breathing was shallow but steady, the rhythm of a body doing the minimum required to persist. The oxygen concentrator hummed beside her bed, and the room smelled faintly of the lavender lotion the visiting aide applied to her hands each evening. Her reading glasses sat folded on the nightstand, a bookmark holding page 214 of a novel she had started the week before the stroke. 6 years that bookmark had held its place, waiting, the way I had been waiting, for a return that might never come. I sat in the chair beside her bed and took her hand. It felt lighter than it should have, fragile in a way that went beyond the muscle atrophy the doctors had explained, as if the bones themselves were thinning from the inside. 43 years. Lee, I whispered, nobody gets to take you from me, not even our son. Her fingers twitched against my palm. I held my breath. It could have been involuntary, a reflex, a nerve firing without instruction. I had watched her hands move 1,000 times in 6 years and told myself each movement was random. But this twitch came after my words, not before, and it pressed against my skin with a directionality that random motion does not possess. I sat frozen in that chair for a full minute, afraid that any movement would break whatever fragile circuit had just closed between us. She did not move again, but I did not let go of her hand. When I finally returned to the kitchen, the morning light had shifted from gray to pale gold. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the first operational entry. Day 1. Begin monitoring. Medication cabinet inspected, 14 bottles confirmed, 1 unregistered vial missing. Leona's vitals stable. Possible responsive hand movement at 0942. I wrote it all in the same tight, precise handwriting I had used on 10,000 bridge reports, because precision was the only weapon I had left. I was closing the notebook when the front door latch turned. Dad. Griffin's voice came from the hallway, casual and warm, hours earlier than his usual schedule. I heard his keys hit the entryway table, his footsteps crossing the hardwood toward the kitchen. The notebook was open on the table. The first entry was still wet with ink. I could see the words Day 1 from where my son would be standing in approximately 4 seconds. 3. 2. I closed the notebook and slid it under a stack of mail, half a second before Griffin rounded the corner into the kitchen. He glanced at the table, at me, at the coffee mug I grabbed to give my hand something innocent to hold. Whatever he saw satisfied him. He stayed 20 minutes, checked on Leona, kissed her forehead, and left. The notebook survived. I moved it that night to a hollowed-out engineering manual on the top shelf of my study, a hiding place born from the understanding that my own home was no longer safe. 2 days later, on the 6th day of my investigation, I was elbow-deep in Leona's medicine cabinet when my fingers touched a bottle that was not on any list. I had been conducting these inspections every afternoon while Leona napped. 14 prescription bottles, each one verified and logged. I knew their positions the way I knew the bolt patterns on a bridge deck by feel, by spacing, by the muscle memory of a man who checks the same structure day after day. So when my fingers brushed something wedged behind the back row, pressed flat against the cabinet's rear panel where casual inspection would never find it, my hand stopped moving before my brain caught up. I pulled it out. Amber plastic. No pharmacy label, no prescription sticker, no identifying marks of any kind except a faint lot number stamped into the base. I unscrewed the cap. 14 white tablets, round, scored down the center. Identical in size, shape, and color to the pills I had glimpsed in the vial Griffin pocketed at the rehabilitation center. 1 unlabeled bottle is carelessness. 2 is inventory. In 40 years of inspection, you never find one corroded bolt. Corrosion travels in clusters, hidden behind the ones you can see. You pull one failed fastener and 3 more come loose in your hand. Someone was restocking this cabinet the way a supplier restocks a shelf rotating product, maintaining supply, keeping the count at a level that suggested controlled, ongoing administration. But it will take time for all 14 tablets. Someone was counting doses, just not for Leona's benefit. I photographed everything, the bottle against the cabinet shelf, the tablet spread on a white washcloth for contrast. The position where I found it, relative to the legitimate prescriptions. I shot each image twice, once with the flash. Once without because Murray had drilled into me that evidence photographed only once is evidence a defense attorney can dismiss as staged. I noted the lot number in my notebook and replaced the bottle exactly where I had found it. Angled the same way, pressed the same distance from the rear panel. If someone checked, they would find everything undisturbed. I was stepping out of the bathroom into the hallway when I heard the front door open. No knock, no call, just the quiet click of a key turning and the soft pad of shoes on hard wood. Nadine came around the corner carrying a glass casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. She was mid-stride, eyes down, and she almost walked into me before she looked up. The casserole dish clinked against the hallway table, and my hand jerked. I nearly dropped the phone. We stood 3 feet apart in the narrow corridor outside Leona's bathroom. My phone was raised at chest height, the camera app still open, the last photograph of the pill bottle still glowing on the screen. Nadine looked at the phone. Then she looked at my face. Her expression did not change. No surprise, no confusion, no question. She turned and walked toward the kitchen without a single word. I stood in that hallway with my heart slamming against my ribs and waited for her to ask. I wanted her to ask. A question would have been something I could work with, an opening for explanation, for deflection, for the mutual pretense that I was simply checking Leona's medication schedule. But Nadine did not ask. She did not look back. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter, collected her keys from beside the stove, and walked out through the front door without saying goodbye. People who do not ask questions already know the answers, or they are deciding what to do with what they saw. Was Nadine here to deliver food, or to check on something she expected to find undisturbed? I moved to the living room window. Nadine's car sat in the driveway, engine running. She was behind the wheel. Not moving, not pulling away. Just sitting with the engine idling and her head bent forward slightly, the way people bend when they are looking at something in their hands. Then I heard it through the window I had cracked open that morning to air out the house. The faint, rhythmic tap of a phone keyboard. Not a call, a text. Multiple texts, from the speed of the tapping, urgent, deliberate. The kind of typing that happens when someone has something important to report to someone who is waiting to hear it. The tapping stopped. The car sat for another 10 seconds. Then Nadine pulled out of the driveway and turned left toward the main road. I checked my phone. No messages from Griffin, no messages from anyone. The silence on my screen felt like the silence before a detonation, not empty, but loaded, waiting for the signal that would turn stillness into force. I did not know who Nadine had texted, but I knew the list of candidates was exactly one name long. 24 hours since Nadine's silent stare in the hallway, and Griffin had not called, had not texted, had not appeared at the front door with his rehearsed smile and his careful questions. The silence should have been a relief. Instead, it sat on my chest like a weight I could not measure. Because in my experience, the most dangerous structures are the ones that give no warning before they fail. I drove to the Lehigh Valley Rehabilitation Center the next morning for Leona's scheduled therapy session. The parking lot smelled like road salt and diesel from a delivery truck idling near the service entrance. I walked through the automatic doors expecting to find Griffin already there, positioned, prepared, one step ahead. But the therapy room was quiet. Just Leona in her wheelchair, and Corinne Whitaker standing beside the monitoring station with her tablet in her hands and an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was the expression of a woman who had decided to stop being afraid. "Close the door," she said. I closed it. Corinne turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a chart, a trend line tracking Leona's reflex response scores and motor function measurements over the past several months. The line rose and fell in a pattern that looked almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat rendered in data points. "Look at weeks 3, 5, and 6, Corinne said. "Then look at the visit log. I shouldn't be showing you this." I looked. During weeks when Griffin did not visit, Leona's scores climbed small but measurable gains in grip strength, pupil tracking, and reflex latency. During weeks when he did visit, every metric dropped. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger an automatic clinical review, but consistently enough that when you laid the visit log beside the trend line, the correlation absolute. Leona completed a grip strength exercise during the session. She squeezed the foam cylinder in her left hand and held it for 3 full seconds, her longest hold in months, and she smiled. Just a flicker. Barely a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it was there. I had to look away before Corinne saw my eyes, because the sight of my wife smiling while I held proof that my son had been systematically erasing her progress was more than I could process without breaking. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Known?" Corinne set the tablet down. "Weeks. Been able to prove it since yesterday, when I ran the numbers a second time. The first time I thought it might be coincidental. Medication adjustments, seasonal variation, therapist rotation. I tested every variable I could think of. Only one held. Griffin. Your son's visit weeks correlate with regression at a rate that would fail any clinical significance test I can name. This is not coincidence. Mr. Prescott, this is cause and effect." The session ended. Leona was wheeled back to the recovery area by an aide whose name I did not catch. Corinne and I stepped into the hallway, and she pulled the therapy room door shut behind us with the careful precision of someone who knows that walls in medical facilities are not as thick as people assume. Griffin did not build a wall around Leona. He built a filter, letting through only what served him, blocking anything that threatened his control. And Corinne had been trapped on the wrong side of that filter for weeks. "He called the clinic director," Corinne said quietly. Her arms were crossed, her back against the corridor wall. "3 weeks ago, when I tried to adjust your wife's medication schedule, he said I was overstepping my role. Said he would move her to a different facility if I continued making changes without his authorization. He threatened your contract. He threatened my access to your wife, which is the same thing." She looked down the hallway. "That's why I whispered to you that day. I had no other way to speak. I couldn't put it in writing. He monitors the patient portal. I couldn't raise it formally. He would have had me removed before the complaint reached anyone who mattered. The only channel he wasn't watching was a 3-second window when he stepped out of the room. A door opened at the far end of the hallway, and we both flinched. An orderly with a linen cart rattled past without looking at us. Corinne exhaled. "He's not protecting his mother," I said. "He's managing her." Corinne reached into the pocket of her lab coat and pulled out a folded printout. She pressed it into my hand without looking at it, as if she had already memorized its contents and wanted it out of her possession as quickly as possible. "The clinic's internal incident report," she said, "from the day your son called the director. I filed it because I am required to file it. I did not expect anything to come of it." I unfolded the page. Standard incident template. Date, description, parties involved, resolution. Which amounted to the director telling Corinne to coordinate all changes through Griffin going forward. But at the bottom of the page, beneath the distribution list, was a CC line I did not expect. The report had been copied to an attorney, not the clinic's attorney, not Griffin's attorney. Someone else entirely, a name I had never encountered in any document connected to my wife's care. Elaine Greer, Esquire, Elder Law, Lehigh County. I stared at the name. I did not know who Elaine Greer was. I did not know whose side she was on. But someone at this clinic had decided that what was happening to my wife required the attention of an elder law specialist. And that knowledge changed the shape of everything. Murray was already waiting at the curb when I walked out of the rehabilitation center, engine running, passenger door open, no explanation needed. I climbed in, and he pulled away before I had my seatbelt fastened. "I know about Elaine Greer," I said, holding up the incident report. Murray glanced at the page and nodded. "I called her this afternoon. She's expecting us." He had made the call before I found the name. That was Murray, always 2 steps ahead of the conversation and 1 step ahead of the crisis. I folded the printout and said nothing for the rest of the drive, watching the street lights of Allentown slide across the windshield like evidence markers on a darkened road. Elaine Greer was 58 years old, an elder law attorney with a corner office on Hamilton Street, packed floor to ceiling with case binders, and a reputation Murray described on the way over as the person who Lehigh County judges actually listened to. She met us at the door herself, no receptionist at this hour, wearing reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the direct. unhurried manner of a woman who had spent 3 decades listening to families describe the worst things happening inside their own homes. She led us to a conference table cleared of everything except a legal pad, a pen, and a glass of water. I laid out my evidence. The POA photographs, the notary date, the template watermark, the therapy correlation data Corinne had shown me, the incident report with Elaine's own name on the CC line. She studied each document in silence, making small notes on her legal pad with handwriting so precise it looked typeset. When she reached the POA, she paused. She pulled up a website on her desktop monitor, typed the notary's name into a search field, and turned the screen toward me. T. Kessel's status in the Pennsylvania Notary Registry read, "Expired," in red block letters. Commission lapsed the previous July. This notary's commission lapsed 6 months before this document was stamped, Elaine said. Whoever applied this seal did so without legal authority. The notarization is void, which means the power of attorney, as executed, is challengeable. Challengeable, not void, not automatically overturned. Challengeable, a word that meant I had a weapon but no guarantee it would fire. There's more, Elaine continued. She opened a second tab on her screen. Your son filed a facility transfer order 4 days ago to move your wife to a long-term residential care facility in Allentown. Under the current POA, he has the authority to do that without your co-signature. How long do I have? The transfer order takes legal effect in 5 days. After that, contesting it becomes significantly harder, not impossible, but harder. You would need to file for emergency guardianship, and the burden shifts. 5 days to do what, exactly? To file a challenge to the POA and a motion to block the transfer. Both require evidence that the document was improperly executed. What you've shown me tonight is strong. But a judge will want more than photographs and correlation charts. A judge will want testimony. She stepped out to pull case precedents from the filing room down the hall. The moment the door closed, Murray leaned forward. The notary search came back, he said. His voice was low, the way it got when he was delivering findings he wished he did not have. T. Kessel works part-time at a document services shop in Bethlehem. Copy center, notary services, legal template printing. The shop has done work for your son's consulting firm, Prescott Allied, going back at least 4 years. If Griffin had practiced this on strangers first, was my wife's stroke an opportunity he had been waiting for? The thought moved through me like ice water through a cracked pipe, slow, inevitable, and destructive in a way that would not become fully visible until the damage was done. The withdrawn complaint, I said, 3 years ago. Murray nodded. Same shop, same firm, same pattern. He paused. Your son's done this before, just never to family. His voice dropped on the last 2 words, the only time all evening his composure cracked. Murray had investigated fraud for 30 years. He had sat across the table from embezzlers, forgers, and con artists who stole retirement funds from people who had spent their lives earning them. But this was different. This was his best friend's son. And even Murray, with all his professional armor, could not say the words, "never to family," without something breaking behind his eyes. The door opened. Elaine returned with her legal pad full of notes and a stack of precedent files under her arm. She sat down, aligned the pad in front of her, and asked one question. Does your son know you found the POA? I hesitated. The answer depended on a text message I had never seen, sent from a driveway 2 days ago by a woman who had walked past me without a word. Murray answered for me. His daughter-in-law saw him with a phone outside Leona's room 2 days ago, so the answer is probably. Elaine absorbed this without expression. She wrote something on her pad, underlined it twice, and looked up. Then we proceed as if he knows, she said, which means we move faster than he expects. I need everything you have delivered to my office by 9 tomorrow morning. And Mr. Prescott, do not go home alone tonight. Murray drove me home that night and waited in the driveway until I locked the front door. I checked on Leona asleep, breathing steady, and sat in the dark kitchen, counting the days I had left. 5. I never heard my alarm. Griffin was already sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. A paper coffee cup in each hand, and a smile calibrated to the exact wattage of a son who has nothing to hide. Same chair, same posture, same control he had projected the day he handed me a clipboard in the hospital corridor and told me where to sign. "Morning, Dad. Brought you a dark roast." I sat down and wrapped my hands around the cup because they needed something to hold. "I've been thinking about Mom's care," he said. Warm, reasonable. The voice you use to talk someone off a ledge they do not know they are standing on. "The new place in Allentown has a full neuro team, round-the-clock monitoring. She'll get better care than we can give her here." "Whatever's best for your mother," I said. His shoulders relaxed 1 inch. "I knew you'd understand. I've already started the paperwork." He kissed Leona's forehead and left. I watched his car turn right toward the main road. The smile had never reached his eyes. It stopped at the mouth like paint on a cracked wall. Decorative. Applied to make the surface look sound when the structure beneath was rotting. The moment his taillights disappeared, I pulled the shared medical account statements from my study. Leona and I had maintained a joint account for her care therapy, medications, equipment. Griffin had managed it since the stroke. I had never audited it. I had trusted my son the way you trust a load-bearing wall completely, unconsciously, until cracks appear where none should exist. The cracks were everywhere. Months' payments to a line item labeled Private Rehabilitation Services had been running for 4 years. But Corinne's clinic billed $4,000 a month. The account showed 12, $8,000 flowing somewhere I could not trace from the statement alone. Then I found the acceleration. The month I started asking questions, the month Corinne whispered her warning, the overcharges jumped from 8,000 to 14. Griffin knew the window was closing and was pulling as much through it as he could. He was not just controlling her recovery, he was billing for the privilege. One line item stopped me cold. Dated 6 weeks ago, buried between pharmacy charges, Prescott Legacy Trust administrative fee, $4,200. I had never authorized a trust under that name, never heard of it. Yet there it was, drawn from my wife's account, funding an entity that bore my son's ambition. I photographed every page and marked the discrepancies with sticky tabs, yellow for anomaly, red for failure. The statements turned red from end to end. That evening I sat on the front porch in the cold. The January air tasted like frozen metal and wood smoke. I was not thinking about the money. I was thinking about the days I had left and the evidence I still needed. I heard the side gate before I saw her. Nadine came around the corner of the house, not through the front door, as if she had parked on the street to avoid being seen from the road. Her hands were shaking so badly, she tucked them into her coat sleeves like a child hiding something broken. "I need to talk to you," she said. She sat on the porch step below me. The positioning was deliberate, looking up, supplicant, placing herself beneath my judgment before she had said a word. "He told me it was routine," she said. Her voice was thin. "The forms, the signatures?" "He told me it was routine, and I signed where he pointed because he was my husband and I believed him." "What forms? Nadine—" She shook her head. "Not a refusal, a gathering, like someone collecting enough air to say something that would change everything." "If I told you everything," she whispered, "could you protect me?" She was not asking if I was able, she was asking if I was willing. And the answer required a promise I was not sure I could keep, because protecting Nadine might mean forgiving her, and I did not know if I had that left in me. I did not answer her question. Instead, I asked one of my own. "What did he make you sign, Nadine?" She opened her mouth. Then she froze. Headlights swept across the porch as Griffin's car turned into the driveway, barely hours ahead of schedule. The engine cut. The door opened. His shoes hit the gravel. Nadine's eyes went wide, and whatever she had been about to tell me retreated behind a mask I recognized because I had been wearing one just like it since breakfast. Nadine stood the instant Griffin's door slammed, smoothing her expression into a wife's welcome smile before he reached the porch steps. She looped her arm through his, said something about bringing over a casserole, and walked him inside without a backward glance. Whatever she had been about to tell me disappeared behind a performance so seamless it made my stomach turn because it meant she had been practicing that mask for a very long time. I woke at 4 the next morning to light spilling from Leona's bedroom. I found her sitting upright in bed for the first time in weeks, propped against the headboard, her eyes fixed on the doorway as if she had been expecting someone. Not the blank drift I had grown accustomed to. This was alert, directed, aware. I stood in the doorframe, and she tracked me with her gaze, the way she used to track a conversation across a boardroom, following movement, reading intention. Calculating. If her cognition was returning this fast without the interference, she might become more than a victim. She might become a witness. And that possibility changed everything. I went to my study and assembled the evidence. Every piece I had gathered over 9 days went into a single manila envelope, the pill bottle photographs. Corinne's therapy log trend data, the bank statements with their overcharge annotations, copies of the power of attorney with the expired notary stamp circled in red, and the incident report that bore Elaine's name on the CC line. I sealed the envelope with packing tape. My hand paused over the seal. For 1 second I imagined putting everything back in the filing cabinet and pretending I had never looked. Pretending the numbers added up. Pretending the notary was real. Pretending my son still deserved the trust I had given him for 40 years. The second passed. I pressed the tape flat. 43 years of marriage reduced to exhibits in a manila envelope. I carried it to Leona's room. She was asleep again, her breathing shallow and steady. 4 days. Lee, I whispered. I just need 4 days. Murray picked me up at noon. We drove to Elaine's office on Hamilton Street without speaking. The silence between us had become its own language, the dialect of 2 old men who understood that some actions cannot be discussed beforehand because discussion invites hesitation, and hesitation was a luxury I no longer possessed. Elaine had cleared her conference table. She opened the envelope, spread each document across the surface, and began annotating with the same precise handwriting I had watched her use before. She worked for 40 minutes. Murray and I sat in the waiting area drinking bitter coffee from a machine that had not been cleaned since the previous administration. When she was ready, she called us back in. The motion requests an emergency hearing within 72 hours, she said. The judge will either grant it or deny it by tomorrow morning. If granted, we present evidence. If denied, we appeal, but the timeline compresses significantly. She turned her monitor toward us. The filing portal was open, the motion loaded, cursor hovering over the submit button. Bridge demolitions work the same way. Once you blow the charges, the structure comes down whether you are ready or not. There is no partial detonation. No controlled pause. You commit or you walk away, and walking away was no longer an option I could live with. Once this is filed, your son will know immediately, Elaine said. He will be formally notified through his attorney of record. There is no undoing that. File it, I said. She clicked. The screen refreshed. A confirmation number appeared in green text at the top of the page. Murray exhaled audibly beside me, the first sound he had made in 20 minutes. It was done. The motion was filed. The emergency petition to halt the facility transfer and challenge the validity of the power of attorney was now part of the public record of Lehigh County, and my son would know about it before I reached my car. Elaine made a note on her legal pad, then pulled up a second screen, the court's attorney of record database. She typed Griffin's name. I need to confirm service details for notification, she said. Then she stopped. I watched her expression change. Not dramatically. Elaine was not a woman given to dramatic expressions. But something tightened behind her eyes, the way steel tightens before it yields. Your son already has an attorney of record on file with this court, she said. She turned the monitor toward me. The name on screen was a partner at Driscoll. Toward me. The name on screen was a partner at Driscoll. Waverly and Holt, one of the largest firms in Allentown. Retained 8 months ago. 8 months, 6 months before the stroke. The room contracted. Murray leaned forward in his chair. Elaine looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with an expression that said she understood exactly what this meant and wanted to make sure I did too. Griffin had not hired a lawyer in response to my challenge. He had hired one in advance, the same way he had prepared the power of attorney, the same way he had established the notary connection, the same way he had set up the trust and the billing structure and the facility transfer. My son did not react to crises. He engineered them, and he had been engineering this one for longer than I wanted to believe. I drove home from Elaine's office with the knowledge that my son had retained one of the most expensive law firms in the Lehigh Valley half a year before his mother's stroke. He had not prepared for a crisis. He had prepared for the moment someone discovered what he was doing. That someone turned out to be me, and I was already behind. I sat in the living room and waited. The court notification would reach Griffin's attorney within the hour. Griffin would know within minutes after that. I did not turn on the television. I did not read. I sat in my chair with my hands on the armrests and listened to the house, the tick of the hallway clock, the hum of Leona's equipment down the corridor, the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling in the cold. The front door hit the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Griffin did not knock anymore. He came through the entryway like a man entering a building he intended to demolish. The court notification crumpled in his fist. His face contorted into something I had never seen on my son before. Not anger exactly, but the raw exposure of a man whose mask has been torn off in public. His first words were not denial. "Who put you up to this?" he said. "Was it that therapist? She's been poisoning you against me since day one." Not, "What is this?" or "There's been a mistake." Who told you? His instinct was not to defend his actions, but to identify the source and neutralize it. I had spent 40 years reading structural failures, and this was the clearest diagnostic I had ever encountered a man whose first response to being caught is to find out who caught him. "Nobody put me up to anything," I said. "I read the POA. Griffin, the one you had notarized while your mother was in the ER. He stared at me. Then the performance began. Phase 1, wounded disbelief. "How could you do this to your own son? After everything I've sacrificed, I gave up my career, I moved back. I have been here every single day while you sat in your study and read your bridge manuals." Phase 2, tactical deflection. "Mom's attorney reviewed the transfer. The new facility is better equipped. This is about her care, Dad, not about control." Phase 3 arrived when neither of the first two produced the reaction he wanted. His voice dropped, his jaw tightened. He swept a framed family photograph off the mantel with the back of his hand. It hit the hardwood floor glass first and cracked down the center. Neither of us picked it up. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "You have no idea what this is going to cost." "I know what a forged notary stamp costs," I said. "I know what $12,000 a month in phantom rehabilitation charges costs. And I know what it costs to retain Driscoll, Waverly and Holt 8 months before your mother had a stroke." The room went silent. From down the hallway, the faint pulse of Leona's oxygen concentrator hummed a mechanical heartbeat, reminding both of us what this fight was actually about. Not money, not legal filings, not wounded pride. A woman who could not speak for herself, lying 50 feet away, listening or not listening, aware or not aware. while her husband and her son stood in the living room, dismantling the family she had spent her life building. Griffin's face changed. The anger did not leave, but something colder moved in behind it, calculation replacing fury, the way ice forms over moving water. "You're 67 years old," he said quietly. "A judge is going to look at you and wonder who really needs a guardian. Then let him look. When did my son start rehearsing threats the way other people rehearse apologies? When did the boy who cried at his grandmother's funeral become a man who could stand in his mother's house and threaten his father with incompetence proceedings? I searched his face for the child I had raised. I found only the consultant polished, strategic, and utterly convinced that every person in a room is either a client or an obstacle. "You don't know what you're doing, Dad," he said. "You don't know what you're going to cost this family." He turned and walked out. He slammed the living room door. He slammed the front door. His car engine roared to life and his tires screamed against the driveway gravel. I stood at the window and watched his taillights disappear the way I had watched them a dozen times before, except this time the pretense was gone. The performance was over, and the son who drove away was not the son who had been arriving at this house for the past 6 years. The house settled into silence. I walked down the hallway to Leona's room. She was awake, eyes open, tracking me as I stepped through the doorway. Not the vacant drift, not the glassy distance. She was looking at me the way she had looked at me in the rearview mirror direct. Present, aware. Her lips moved, no sound came out. But I had spent 43 years reading that face, and I did not need sound to understand. She mouthed one word. "Griffin." She had heard everything. I sat beside Leona's bed that night, holding her hand, watching her eyes track me in the dim light. She had mouthed his name. She had heard the shouting through the walls. Whatever prison Griffin had built around her mind was cracking, and the woman inside was pressing against the fractures. I whispered that I was close. I whispered that I needed one more day. She blinked once, slowly, and I chose to believe it meant she understood. 24 hours of silence from Griffin. No call, no visit, no text. Silence from my son had never meant surrender, it meant recalculation. It meant he was sitting in a room somewhere with his expensive attorney, redesigning his approach the way a contractor redesigns a bid after the first one gets rejected. Same objective, different angle, faster timeline. Murray called that evening. I was in my study with the desk lamp on and the curtains drawn, the house locked, every light in the hallway burning because darkness had stopped feeling safe. "I got into the template metadata," Murray said. His voice had the flat, controlled quality it took on when he was delivering findings he wished he could retract. "The asset transfer POA your son filed last month, the one for the facility move. It was created using the same Quick Legal Pro account as the original medical POA from 6 years ago." I said nothing. Same template, same account, same clause structure, with the scope widened from medical to financial, 6 years apart. 6 years, I repeated. "The original template was created 3 weeks after Thanksgiving," Murray said. 6 years ago. "I checked your son's travel records through the firm's billing system. My former colleague still has access. Griffin visited you that Thanksgiving. Stayed 4 days. Longest visit he'd made in 3 years. I remembered that visit. I remembered it because it was the nicest Thanksgiving we had had in years. Griffin had carved the turkey. He had helped Leona clear the table. He had sat on the porch with me afterward and asked about my retirement plans, my health, my patents, the licensing agreements that generated royalty income. I had been touched by his interest. I had mistaken inventory for affection. "He didn't start this when Leona had her stroke," Murray said. "He started it 6 years ago and waited for the stroke to finish it." "My son has been planning to rob his mother for 6 years," I said, "and I never saw it." Murray was quiet for a moment. "You weren't supposed to see it. That was the whole point." I hung up. The study was silent except for the ticking of the desk clock and the sound of my own breathing, which had become shallow and fast in a way I recognized from the one time I had stood on a bridge deck that was actively failing the body's response to a structure dissolving beneath your feet. Before I show you what I found next, are you still with me? Drop your prediction in one sentence. What do you think Griffin was really planning? Because this next part rewrites everything. A quick note, some details ahead are dramatized to convey the emotional weight of what happened. The lesson behind it is what matters. I pulled the facility transfer documents Griffin had left on the kitchen counter during his last visit, the ones I had pretended to consider. The ones I had photographed but never examined closely. I spread them beside the phone photographs of the original POA. Engineers call it a sleeper defect, a flaw built into a structure during construction that does not activate until load conditions change. You can inspect a bridge for 20 years and never find it because the defect is designed to remain dormant until the structure bears a weight it was never meant to carry. Leona's stroke was the load condition. Griffin's documents were the defect. And they had been sleeping in the system since a Thanksgiving dinner where my son asked me about my patents while passing the cranberry sauce. The language was identical, not similar identical, the same paragraph breaks, the same defined terms, the same subordinate clauses nested in the same order. Only the scope had changed where the original granted medical authority. The new version granted financial control over assets totaling more than $30 million, patent royalties, company equity, retirement accounts, the house. I set the documents down and pressed both palms flat against the desk, the same steadying gesture I had used the night I found the notary date. It was becoming a reflex, the body's way of anchoring itself when the mind encounters a truth too heavy to hold upright. Every holiday dinner, every birthday phone call, every time he said, "I love you, Mom," with that warm, practiced voice. He had been running out the clock on a 6-year plan, and every display of devotion was a calendar page turning toward the day he would collect. I built bridges meant to last a century. My son built a trap designed to last just long enough. My hands would not stop shaking. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened, then looked up at the wall above the filing cabinet. A framed photograph hung there, Griffin at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a bridge dedication ceremony, both of us laughing into the camera. His hands were gripping my hair, my hands were holding his ankles. We were the safest thing in each other's world. I stared at that photograph until my vision blurred. The boy on my shoulders and the man who built a 6-year cage around his mother occupied the same face, and I could not make them fit together no matter how long I looked. I left the photograph on the wall. There was nothing to be gained from taking it down and nothing to be gained from staring at it any longer. The boy on my shoulders was gone. The man who replaced him had spent 6 years building a trap with the patience of an architect and the conscience of a demolition crew. I called Elaine that morning with Murray's template findings, and her silence on the line lasted long enough to tell me the case had just changed from a family dispute to premeditated fraud. Griffin arrived before noon. He was wearing a tie the first time I had seen him dressed for business inside this house, and it told me everything about what was coming. This was not a son visiting his father. This was a consultant arriving at a negotiation, and the tie was his armor. He sat down at the kitchen table and placed his phone face down beside his coffee. The gesture was precise, deliberate. A man clearing the stage before delivering a prepared speech. "I'm going to make this simple. Dad," he said, "withdraw the court motion. Do it today. We go back to being a family, and none of this has to get worse." "And if I don't?" "Then I file for emergency guardianship." He paused. "Over Mom and over you." The room shifted. I had anticipated the threat against Leona. I had not anticipated him turning the weapon on me. He was going to use my age, my behavior over the past 2 weeks, the midnight phone calls, the secret meetings with attorneys. the photographs of pill bottles and frame it as evidence of cognitive decline. The 67-year-old retiree acting erratically under stress. A judge might listen. A judge might look at me and see exactly what Griffin wanted him to see. I let my shoulders drop. I let my voice crack. I let the performance of an old man overwhelmed by forces beyond his comprehension settle over my features like a mask, because I had learned from the best. "Just give me 3 days," I said. "Please, I need think." Griffin studied me. I could feel him measuring the sincerity of my collapse the way I used to measure the deflection of bridge beams under test loads, looking for the point where resistance ends and yield begins. Whatever he saw satisfied him. 3 days, he said. Then I handle this my way. Nadine stood in the doorway behind him. I saw her hand grip the doorframe, knuckles white. The same gesture I had made against my own desk the night before. I could not tell if she was holding on or holding back. She said nothing. She watched her husband deliver his ultimatum to his father in the kitchen, where she used to make Sunday pancakes for a family she must have believed was real. And she did not say a single word. Griffin left. The tie disappeared through the front door. The car started. The gravel crunched. Nadine followed 30 seconds later without looking at me. 2 departures, 2 silences, and I stood alone in the kitchen, wondering which of them was more afraid. I poured cold coffee into the sink and washed the mug by hand. The domestic routine steadied me, the way it always had: soap, water, porcelain. The simple physics of clean surfaces. I was drying my hands when my phone rang. Corinne's voice was not steady. It was not clinical. It was the voice of a woman whose professional composure had just been stripped away. "He came to the center," she said, 20 minutes ago. He walked in with a transfer authorization and told the director, 'I'm done, effective today.' He terminated your contract. He told them your wife is being moved to a residential facility in Allentown and that my services are no longer required." The director didn't fight it. Griffin's name is on the POA as primary medical decision-maker. They had no legal reason to refuse. Her voice broke mid-sentence. The crack was brief, half a second of raw fear escaping through professional armor, and then she recovered. But I heard it. It was the first time Corinne had ever sounded anything other than controlled. "If you don't act today," she said, "I won't be allowed to see your wife again. And once she's in that facility, Griffin controls who walks through the door." How do you fight someone who shakes your hand with a 3-day promise and picks your pocket with the other? Griffin had given me 72 hours to my face and started dismantling my support structure before his car reached the main road. The 3 days were theater. He had never intended to wait. I hung up with Corinne and dialed Elaine. 4 rings. Voicemail. I tried Murray. Voicemail. I stood in the kitchen alone, phone in hand, Leona asleep down the hall. The January light coming through the window was flat and gray, the color of unpainted steel. Every ally I had built over the past 11 days was unreachable, and my son was moving faster than I had calculated, cutting access, terminating contracts, filing transfer orders, dismantling the network of people who had been helping me protect my wife. I had hours, not days, hours, and I was standing in my own kitchen with no one to call and nothing to do but wait for someone to call me back. The silence tasted like metal. Elaine called back 40 minutes later. Her voice was brisk and tight, the voice of a woman who had already shifted from strategy to execution. "The hearing is granted," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Judge Whitfield's courtroom. But I need more than what we have. I need a witness who was inside the house, and I need you at the police station in 1 hour." Elaine was already standing outside her office entrance when I pulled up folder under her arm, reading glasses on, war footing. We drove to the station together. She walked me through the process on the way: formal complaint, dependent adult abuse, and power of attorney fraud, supporting evidence package attached. The words sounded clinical in her mouth. They sounded like a demolition order in mine. The detective who reviewed our package was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s named Holt, no relation to Griffin's law firm, I checked. He spent 20 minutes with the documents, made notes in a yellow legal pad, and scheduled an evidence collection visit to my home within 48 hours. Then he looked up. "Are you certain your daughter-in-law isn't involved?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. I had been avoiding it for days, circling the possibility, testing it from angles, never quite letting myself settle on an answer. "I don't know yet," I said, "but she's scared enough to talk." Elaine leaned forward. "Then make her talk tonight. Before the hearing, not after." I signed the formal complaint at the detective's desk. The ink felt heavier than any contract I had ever put my name to. Every signature I had written in 40 years of engineering had built something: a bridge, an inspection report, a licensing agreement that created value. This signature dismantled. It took apart a family and laid the pieces on a government desk under fluorescent light. And there was no template in any engineering manual for how to do that without your hands shaking. I called Nadine from the parking lot. I did not tell her where I had been. I told her I needed to see her, away from the house, somewhere Griffin would not think to look. She was quiet for 5 seconds. Then she named a cafe in Macungie, a small place off the main road that she went to alone on weekday afternoons when she needed to think. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar. Nadine was already in a back booth when I arrived, her coat still on, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had not touched. A skin was forming on the surface. She had been sitting there long enough for the coffee to cool and the courage build. "He told me the pills were supplements," she said before I could sit down. "Vitamins for brain recovery. He said the doctors didn't know about them because they were from a private clinic and the insurance wouldn't cover it." I believed him because I wanted to believe him. She talked for 10 minutes without pausing for breath or a sip. The documents she had signed: proxy authorizations, trust amendments, facility transfer consents. She had not read any of them. She had signed where Griffin pointed because he was her husband and she trusted him, and by the time she began to suspect that the paperwork was not routine, she was too deep in the signature trail to pull herself out without implicating herself. "When did you know?" I asked. 2 weeks ago." Her voice dropped. "I saw a text on his phone. He left it on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't suspicious. I just saw the screen light up and I looked." "What did it say?" Nadine reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened the photo gallery, scrolled to a screenshot, and slid the phone across the table. The text was from Griffin to Nadine, dated 11 days ago, the same night I had sat beside Leona's bed and whispered my promise to protect her. While I was holding my wife's hand in the dark, my son was sending instructions to his wife on the other side of the house. 6 words. "Don't let Dad know about the new dosage. Just keep her asleep." I stared at the screen, my vision blurred. When it cleared, I saw my own reflection in the phone's glass, an old man in a cafe booth, holding proof that his son had been keeping his wife in a chemical sleep. The reflection looked older than I remembered, older than I had been 11 days ago, when the worst thing I could imagine was that my wife's tremors were getting worse. Nadine was crying, quietly, steadily, the tears running down her face without sound, the crying of a woman who had been holding it in so long that the release came without drama. Just gravity. I was not crying. I was past crying. I was in the place beyond grief, where the body stops producing tears because every resource it has is being redirected toward the single task of surviving the next 12 hours. "I can't protect him anymore," Nadine whispered. "Not after what I saw." "Will you testify?" She closed her eyes, opened them, nodded once. I photographed the screenshot with my own phone. Then I put my hand over hers on the table, not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. She had been complicit. She had also been trapped. And tomorrow morning, Her testimony would be the difference between a judge who listens and a judge who dismisses. The oxygen machine shut off at 2:14 a.m. I didn't touch it. Nobody touched it. The compressor clicked twice, wheezed, and stopped, and Leona kept breathing. I sat in the vinyl chair beside her bed with every light off except the hallway nightlight, listening to the slow draw of her lungs pulling air without mechanical help for the first time in 11 days. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something closer to fury dressed in hope. I had spent the last 4 hours reviewing Elaine's emergency motion on my phone, scrolling the same paragraphs until the words blurred. But Leona's breathing had changed around midnight. The rhythm shifted. Longer inhales, steadier exhales. The kind of pattern I used to hear when she fell asleep reading on the porch in summer. Familiar. Human. Not the shallow, medicated rasp I'd grown accustomed to. I set the phone on the nightstand and leaned forward. Leona. Nothing. Leona. I'm right here. Her fingers moved. Not a twitch. I'd cataloged every involuntary spasm over these weeks, and this was different. Her index finger curled against my palm, then her middle finger followed, and the pressure held, light as a sparrow landing on a wire, but deliberate. She was squeezing my hand. I pressed my forehead to the mattress rail and held on. The furnace kicked on downstairs, and warm air pushed through the floor vent, carrying the faint smell of dust and cedar, the same scent that hit me every winter in this house for 41 years. I breathed it in and thought about load tolerance. Every bridge has a threshold where stress becomes failure. Griffin had pushed Leona past hers with chemicals designed for animals, and her body was fighting back the moment the dosage dropped. Nadine's defection meant nobody had administered the evening dose. Leona was surfacing because nobody was holding her under. I stayed in that chair until gray light edged the curtains. Her hand relaxed around 4, but her breathing never faltered. I counted respirations like I used to count rivet inspections, methodical, patient, refusing to skip a single one. 14 per minute, consistent. The woman I married was still in there, running on her own power. At 6:45, I heard tires on the gravel drive. I moved to the window expecting Elaine, but the vehicle was a marked cruiser followed by an unmarked sedan. Detective Holt stepped out of the sedan, wearing the same gray overcoat from 3 days ago, and 2 uniformed officers flanked him, carrying evidence bins. I met them at the front door in yesterday's clothes. Elaine Greer called you.
Last night, Holt said. He didn't waste words.
We have a warrant for pharmaceutical items, documents related to power of attorney, and any financial records stored on the premises. You're welcome to observe. There's a journal in the kitchen drawer, I said. My handwriting. Every pill I found, every date, every dosage marking I could read off the labels. Take it. Holt glanced at the nearest officer. Start with the kitchen. I walked them through the house like I was conducting a site inspection. Master bathroom, 2 prescription bottles in Leona's name, one with a pharmacy label that didn't match any local pharmacy. Hall closet, the lockbox, where Griffin kept the POA originals, now pried open with a flathead screwdriver I'd used 2 nights ago when sleep was impossible. Guest bedroom nightstand, the 3rd bottle Corrine had identified, still half full of unmarked capsules. The officers bagged and tagged with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before. I watched a younger officer photograph the Neurovital Plus bottle from 4 angles, turning it under the overhead light. He stopped, tilted the bottle, pulled a magnifier from his vest pocket. "Detective," he said. Holt crossed the room in 3 steps. The officer pointed to the lower right corner of the label, a section I'd examined a dozen times without understanding what I was seeing. "Lot number prefix," Holt said. He looked at me. VETK9. This isn't a human pharmaceutical lot designation. This is a veterinary batch code. The room contracted. I had suspected the capsules weren't standard medication. Corinne's analysis had confirmed the compound was wrong, but a veterinary lot number meant the substance was never intended for human consumption at any dose. It meant someone had sourced sedatives from an animal supply chain to avoid the prescription tracking systems that would flag unusual quantities. I thought about Griffin at 22, graduating summa cum laude, shaking my hand on the auditorium steps while Leona cried with pride. I thought about the routing number on the Prescott Legacy Trust. I thought about the 8 months between retaining Driscoll, Waverly and Holt, and Leona's stroke, and now veterinary tranquilizers in my wife's bloodstream. This wasn't financial abuse dressed in family loyalty. This was poisoning. "Mr. Prescott," Holt said. His voice had changed harder, more careful. "I'm going to recommend this case be referred to the county prosecutor's criminal division. Do you have representation?" "Elaine Greer. She's expecting your call." Holt nodded. The officers sealed the last bin and carried it to the cruiser. I stood on the porch and watched them load evidence boxes into the trunk. Pill bottles, the journal, photocopied POA documents, Griffin's fabricated notary certification. 11 days of work, reduced to inventory numbers on chain of custody forms. Upstairs, Leona breathed on her own, and downstairs. A lot number designed for sedating dogs had just turned my son's guardianship scheme into a criminal prosecution. Elaine's referral to the prosecutor was barely an hour old when tires screamed up the driveway and a car door slammed hard enough to rattle the garage siding. I didn't stand. I knew that engine. I knew that slam. Griffin was through the front door before I could draw a full breath, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Someone at the precinct had talked. "What did you do?" He stood in the living room archway, coat still on, car keys clenched in his right fist like a weapon. "There were police here this morning, at our house. What did you tell them?" I sat in the wingback chair by the window and said nothing. "Dad." He took 2 steps closer. His voice shifted softer now, wounded. "After everything I've done for this family, I gave up my career to take care of Mom. I moved back to this town. I handled the insurance, the medical bills, the trust paperwork, all of it. And this is what I get. Cops going through our drawers." The word "our" landed wrong. This was my house, Leona's house. Griffin had moved back 14 months ago and started calling it ours within a week, the same way he'd started calling her assets his within a month of the stroke. I watched his hands. The keys shifted from his right fist to his left, a negotiator resetting. "Call your lawyer," he said. The grief evaporated from his tone, like water off a hot griddle, pure transaction now. "Right now. Tell Elaine it was a misunderstanding. Tell her you were confused, that you panicked, that you found some old bottles and jumped to conclusions. We can fix this before the hearing if you make that call in the next 10 minutes. He didn't deny the bottles. He didn't ask what the police found. He went straight to containment, which meant he knew exactly what was in those capsules and exactly what the lot numbers would reveal." Griffin kicked the coffee table sideways. It skidded across the hardwood and stopped against the bookcase, one leg leaving a white scratch on the floor. Leona had refinished the summer before her stroke. Neither of us moved to write it. Sunday puzzles used to live on that table, Leona's tradition. A 1,000-piece landscape every week. The border first. Always the border first. Griffin used to help with the sky pieces when he was 12. That boy gone. "You're not listening to me," his voice climbed. "This will destroy us all. You, Mom, Nadine, everyone." "Is that what you want? You want Nadine dragged into a courtroom? You want Mom's medical records made public? You want reporters outside this house?" I let him talk. An engineer learns early that some structures have to fail completely before you can assess the damage. Griffin was failing, now cycling faster, each phase shorter than the last. The wounded son had lasted 2 minutes, the tactical negotiator barely 90 seconds. The threat phase was already fraying at the edges because threats require leverage. And Griffin's leverage was upstairs breathing on her own for the first time in 11 days. He paced to the mantel and back, His hand swept across the shelf and knocked Leona's reading glasses to the floor. The smell of his cologne mixed with sweat filled the room, sharp, chemical. Nothing like the soap and cedar scent this house was supposed to carry. I tasted copper at the back of my throat, the way I always do when anger sits too long without release. For 1/2 second his voice cracked on the word, Mom. I saw the boy who cried at his grandmother's funeral, who held my hand in the church parking lot and asked if people really disappear forever. Then it was gone, replaced by the man who sourced veterinary sedatives to keep his mother compliant. The transition took less than a heartbeat. "Say something," Griffin said. He had stopped pacing. His fists were clenched at his sides, chest heaving, waiting for me to fight back so he could escalate. That was his pattern: provoke a reaction, then use the reaction as proof of unreasonableness. I'd watched him do it to Nadine. I'd watched him do it to Leona's doctors. I would not give him the satisfaction. I wondered whether he had rehearsed this performance in his car, or whether manipulation came so naturally he didn't need practice anymore. I thought about the Quick Legal Pro watermark, the fabricated notary, the 8 months of preparation before a stroke that might not have been entirely natural. Every data point I'd collected over 11 days arranged itself in my mind like a stress diagram: forces, loads, failure points, all converging on the man standing in my living room. "Dad." Quieter now, almost a whisper. "Please." I looked at my son. 40 years old, consulting firm, corner office. Every advantage Leona and I could give him, and he'd converted all of it into a machine for controlling the woman who gave it. "I decided 3 days ago," I said. "Now wait." Griffin stared at me. His mouth opened, then closed. No rebuttal, no counteroffer, no threat. For the first time in this entire confrontation, he had nothing left to leverage. He walked out without closing the door. I heard the car start, then nothing. No revving engine, no tires on gravel, just idling. Through the open doorway I could see him sitting behind the wheel, not driving, staring at the house. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear who answered. Griffin sat in that driveway for 11 minutes. I counted from the wingback chair, watching through the window I'd watched from all morning. He held the phone to his ear for most of it, then set it on the passenger seat, stared at the house one final time, and backed out slowly. No screech this time. No slammed door. That quiet departure unsettled me more than his arrival had. I closed the front door he'd left open. The latch clicked, and the house went still. And I stood in the silence wondering why the aftermath of a storm always sounds louder than the storm itself. Griffin's cologne still hung in the air, that sharp, chemical scent that had no business in a house that was supposed to smell like cedar and old books. I started cleaning. Not because it mattered, because my hands needed purpose while my mind turned over what was coming. I righted the coffee table Griffin had kicked, aligning it with the marks Leona had made on the hardwood years ago so it would sit exactly where she wanted it. I swept plaster dust from the wall where his fist had cracked the surface near the hallway. I picked up Leona's reading glasses from the floor where he'd knocked them off the mantel and set them on her nightstand, next to the novel with the bookmark still at page 214. She might actually finish that book now. The thought arrived without warning, sharp and tender, and I had to sit on the edge of the bed for a moment before I could keep moving. Leona was awake. Not the half-conscious drift I'd grown used to. Her eyes were open and tracking, following me as I moved around the room. One hand rested on her stomach as if guarding something precious. The fog Griffin had been feeding her was burning off, and what remained underneath was a woman I recognized. I pulled the chair close and sat with her. I didn't explain what had happened. I didn't promise everything would be all right. I just held her hand, the way I had at 2 a.m, and let the silence carry what words couldn't. Her fingers tightened once. That was enough. I went downstairs and made coffee I didn't drink. The mug sat on the counter growing cold while I stood at the kitchen window, watching the empty driveway. At 2:47, my phone rang. Virgil. Elaine's voice carried the particular steadiness she used when delivering information that would change the shape of everything. I have 3 things, and I need you to hear all of them before you respond. I braced my free hand against the counter. Go ahead. First, the notary. T. Kessel never existed in Pennsylvania's registry. Not expired, not suspended, not transferred from another state, never registered. The signature on the power of attorney is a complete fabrication. Your son invented a person to legitimize the document. I had to sit down. I pulled out a kitchen chair and lowered myself into it because my legs had decided independently that standing was no longer an option. I'd assumed Kessel was real, but compromised a retired notary, bribed or coerced into backdating a stamp. The idea that Griffin had manufactured a human being from nothing created a name and a signature and a commission number that pointed to empty air. Restructured everything I thought I understood about how far he'd planned this. Second, Elaine continued, the lab analysis on the veterinary lot number is complete. The compound in those capsules matches the unlabeled bottles Corinne identified. Same formulation, same batch. Combined with Nadine's testimony and the text message screenshot, the evidentiary chain is closed. In 40 years of reviewing structural drawings, the worst failures I caught were never the ones that cracked under pressure. They were the ones built on foundations that were never there to begin with. A pier sunk into sand instead of bedrock. A footing poured over fill dirt nobody tested. Griffin's entire guardianship was that kind of structure, impressive on the surface, hollow underneath. And now the inspection was over. Third, Elaine paused. When she spoke again, her voice was measured but final. The DA has authorized an arrest warrant for Griffin Prescott. Dependent adult abuse, power of attorney fraud, and administering a controlled substance without prescription. 3 charges, ours now, Virgil. I closed my eyes. The coffee had gone completely cold. I could taste the bitter residue on my tongue from the single sip I'd taken 20 minutes ago, and it mixed with something metallic rising from my chest, not relief. Not grief. Something between the two that didn't have a name. Will they come to the house? I asked. That depends on where they find him. Does Griffin know? Elaine paused again. Longer this time. His attorney was notified 20 minutes ago as a courtesy, so yes, he knows. I stood and walked to the living room window. The driveway was empty. The street beyond it was empty. No idling engine, no figure behind a steering wheel, no sign that my son had been here at all. Griffin hadn't come back after that 11-minute vigil in his car. He hadn't called. He hadn't sent Nadine. He'd been told a warrant was coming, and he'd gone silent. For the first time in 11 days, his absence frightened me more than his presence ever had. Griffin's silence lasted 3 hours and 12 minutes. Then, red and blue lights swept across the living room ceiling, and I understood he hadn't been running. He'd been coming back. Through the front window, I saw his sedan pull into the driveway. At the same moment, a patrol cruiser rolled up behind it, blocking him in. He was still in the suit from this morning's confrontation, the tie loosened, the collar dark with sweat despite the February cold. He'd driven somewhere, sat with whatever decision he was making, and chosen to return to the house where everything started. The police were faster by seconds. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser. Griffin was already on the porch, one hand raised as if to knock, when the taller officer called his name and read the charges. I stood in the hallway behind the screen door, close enough to hear every word, but far enough that Griffin couldn't reach me. He was calm for exactly 4 seconds. His chin dipped once, his hands moved to his sides, and he looked like a man prepared to cooperate with dignity. Then he saw Nadine. She had come downstairs without my hearing her. She stood 3 feet behind me in the hallway, arms crossed over her chest, wearing the same cardigan she'd had on the night she showed me the text message. Griffin's composure dissolved the instant their eyes met. His face rearranged itself not into anger but into something worse. Calculation. "She's the one," he said, pointing past me. "Ask her what she signed. Ask her about the dosages. She administered every pill. I was trying to protect Mom from her." The taller officer stepped forward. "Mr. Prescott, we have a cooperation agreement on file for Mrs. Prescott. You need to stop talking." Griffin didn't stop. He kept pointing at Nadine, his voice climbing, listing things she'd supposedly done, forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, medication schedules she'd followed without question. Every accusation was a mirror image of his own crimes, flipped and projected onto the woman who'd finally broken ranks. The handcuffs came out. The click was quieter than I expected. Nothing like television, just a small metallic sound. No louder than a cabinet latch. And it ended a family. Griffin's wrists were behind his back now. The officer guided him down the porch steps and across the walkway toward the cruiser. The February air carried the smell of exhaust and frozen grass and something else, Griffin's cologne again, fainter now, dissipating into the night like the last trace of a presence that had overstayed its welcome. I tasted salt on my lips. I hadn't realized I was biting the inside of my cheek. "Dad." Griffin turned his head as they walked him past the boxwood hedge. "Dad, look at me. You know me. You know I wouldn't—" I stood on the porch with my hands at my sides and did not speak. Porch lights were coming on down the street. One house, then the next, then 3 more. A chain reaction of curiosity spreading through the neighborhood like current through a circuit. A child's voice carried across the yard from the Drummond house. "Mommy, why are the police at Mr. Prescott's house?" I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the officer was putting his hand on top of Griffin's head, guiding him into the back seat the way I'd seen it done 1,000 times on evening news broadcasts that had never once felt real until now. "Dad!" Muffled behind the cruiser window, his palm flat against the glass. "Dad! Please!" I built bridges for 40 years. I supervised the construction of spans that carried 10,000 vehicles a day across rivers and valleys and fault lines. I never once watched one come down. Now I knew what it sounded like. It sounded like your son calling your name through safety glass and you choosing not to answer. Nadine was crying in the doorway behind me, small, strangled sounds she was trying to swallow. "I'm sorry, Virgil," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I didn't turn around. I watched the officer close the cruiser door and walk to the driver's side. The engine was still running. The exhaust plume curled white in the cold air. Griffin's face was visible through the rear window, mouth moving, still talking, still arguing his case to an empty seat. The cruiser's headlights swept the garage wall as it reversed out of the driveway. The taillights shrank to red dots at the end of the street, and I thought about expansion joints. Once a bridge separates, you cannot push the halves back together by hand. You have to demolish what remains and pour new foundations. And sometimes, the soil won't hold a second structure. The cruiser turned the corner and disappeared. The street went dark, except for the neighbor lights, which clicked off one by one as the show ended. The silence that settled over the house was unlike any silence I had known in 41 years of living here. Not peaceful, not empty, absolute. I turned from the driveway and walked inside. The hallway stretched ahead of me, dim and still. Leona's bedroom door was open. I hadn't left it open. Nadine hadn't gone up there. I stopped walking. Leona was sitting up in bed, awake, eyes clear, focused, fixed directly on me. Her lips moved, and what came out was not a murmur or a half-formed sound. It was my name. Clear as a bell. The first word she had spoken in weeks. Virgil. I don't cry when things go wrong. I never have. Not when the Schuylkill River project lost its federal funding 3 weeks before completion. Not when my mother died on a Tuesday afternoon while I was inspecting a retaining wall 60 miles away. I cry after. When the structure holds and I realize what it cost to keep it standing. Leona had fallen back asleep after saying my name. Her breathing was steady and unmedicated, her face slack with the kind of rest that comes from exhaustion rather than chemistry. I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed my fist against my mouth and came apart. Not a clean cry. Not the dignified grief you see in films where a single tear tracks down a stoic jaw. This was a body-shaking collapse that started in my chest and worked outward until my shoulders were heaving and my throat was raw, and the only sound in the room was a 67-year-old man trying to muffle himself so he wouldn't wake his wife. I wept for the son I raised. I wept for the son I'd had arrested 3 hours ago. And I wept for the 40 years between those two versions of him every birthday, every graduation, every phone call, every holiday table, because every one of those memories was contaminated now. I couldn't think of Griffin at 12 helping Leona with her Sunday puzzles without seeing Griffin at 40 sourcing veterinary sedatives. The boy and the man occupied the same face, and I couldn't separate them anymore. I counted Leona's breaths in the dark. 12 per minute, steady, unmedicated. The normalcy of that rhythm, the sheer ordinary miracle of a woman breathing on her own, made me cry harder, because it proved how far from normal we'd been.
I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner.
Lee, I whispered. My hand was on her forearm, my thumb tracing the vein that surfaced near her wrist. I was looking at him and seeing the boy he was, not the man he became. She didn't stir. I stayed until my breathing matched hers, then went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with the lights off and a glass of water I didn't drink. The law said I'd done the right thing. The law didn't know what the right thing costs. Leona had said my name. That meant she was coming back. The question was, what kind of family she was coming back to. 4 days passed. Murray called twice. Elaine called once to confirm the arraignment date. Corinne came by to check Leona's vitals and left without small talk, reading the silence in the house the way a good clinician reads a chart. I cooked meals I barely ate, washed dishes that were already clean, and walked the perimeter of the yard each morning like I was inspecting a site that no longer had a project attached to it. On the 5th day, Nadine came, not through the front door. She used the side entrance off the mudroom, the one that led directly into the kitchen, the one nobody used except delivery drivers and contractors. The choice was deliberate. She had lost the right to the main threshold, and she knew it. She set her keys on the kitchen counter exactly where Griffin used to set his, then caught herself and slid them to the opposite end. The gesture was small and enormous at the same time. "I don't deserve to be here," she said. She stood across the table from me, coat still on, hands clasped in front of her like a witness waiting to be sworn in. Her eyes were swollen in a way that suggested the crying hadn't stopped for days. "But I need you to know I loved her before I loved him. I still do." I studied her face. 37 years old, and she looked 50. Griffin had aged her the same way he'd aged the rest of us, by converting trust into infrastructure for his own ambitions. Could I forgive someone for being weak when their weakness almost killed the person I loved most? I didn't know. But I could set terms. "You can visit," I said, "but nothing happens in this house that I don't know about. Nothing. No phone calls to attorneys I haven't met. No documents I haven't read. No medications I haven't approved. You walk through the front door, and you tell me why you're here before you go upstairs." Nadine nodded. No argument. No negotiation. "I still consider her my mother," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but held. That was never a lie. I believed her. Not because the words were convincing, but because she'd entered through the side door. People who are performing use the main entrance. People who are ashamed find smaller ways in. After she left, I opened my engineering notebook to the last entry, day 14, and wrote one final line beneath it. Case closed. Family status unknown. I stared at the words for a long time, then closed the notebook and carried it to the filing cabinet in the study. I placed it in the drawer next to the folder Leona had labeled years ago in her careful handwriting, "Important, do not digitize." Some records should stay on paper, some damage should stay private, and some fathers should be allowed to grieve their sons without anyone asking them to explain why. 3 weeks after I filed that notebook away, Leona walked to the kitchen table unassisted and asked where Griffin was. I told her the truth. She listened without expression, nodded once, and asked for toast. We didn't speak about it again until the morning I left for the courthouse. The metal detector beeped on my belt buckle brass, square-edged, with a tiny scratch on the left corner where Griffin had dropped it on the driveway when he was 9. Leona bought it for me the year he was born. I stood in the security line at Lehigh County Courthouse thinking about that, and the irony nearly broke my composure before I reached the courtroom doors. Elaine was already seated at the petitioner's table. She wore the same navy suit she'd worn to every hearing, and her briefcase was closed, a detail I'd learned to read. Open briefcase meant work ahead. Closed briefcase meant the work was done, and we were here for the formality of watching it land. Griffin sat at the defense table in a suit I didn't recognize. Not one of his tailored pieces from the consulting firm days, this one hung wrong at the shoulders, slightly too large, borrowed or rented. His attorney sat beside him, sorting papers with the mechanical focus of someone who'd already lost and was now managing the wreckage. Griffin's assets had been frozen since the arrest. His firm was dissolved. The man who'd once filed transfer orders in courtrooms like this one couldn't afford his own wardrobe. Griffin had entered a guilty plea 2 weeks earlier, accepting the criminal charges in exchange for avoiding a jury trial. At Elaine's request, the judge had agreed to consolidate his sentencing with the civil ruling on Leona's power of attorney, sparing the family a second court date. The judge entered. Honorable Ruth Calloway, mid-60s, silver hair cropped short, the kind of face that had delivered 10,000 verdicts and stopped keeping count. She read the findings without inflection: fraudulent execution of power of attorney, fabrication of a notary identity, administration of a controlled veterinary substance to a dependent adult. Each charge landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water, the silence between them heavier than the words. The court finds the power of attorney fraudulent in its execution, scope, and notarization. Judge Calloway said, "It is hereby voided in its entirety." Then the sentence: supervised probation 5 years, full financial restitution to the protective trust, permanent revocation of inheritance rights. A restraining order barring Griffin from any contact with Leona without prior court approval. When the judge said permanent revocation, Griffin's attorney flinched. Actually flinched, a visible contraction of the shoulders that told me they'd been negotiating for partial access until this morning, and lost. Elaine leaned toward me. "The trust is sealed," she whispered. "He can't touch it. Not now, not ever." I looked at the defense table. Griffin stared straight ahead, jaw set, hands flat on the surface in front of him. I thought about what those assets represented: the patent royalties, the company equity, all of it built by a woman who was now relearning how to walk across her own kitchen. My son had looked at his mother and seen a portfolio. He'd assigned her a valuation, the way an accountant prices inventory, and he'd structured a scheme to liquidate her while she was still breathing. Griffin's hands were uncuffed. Probation, not prison. I noticed that detail and felt a complicated relief I would never admit to anyone, not Elaine, not Murray, not even Leona. He was my son. The part of me that wanted him locked away was real, but so was the part that was grateful he wouldn't sleep on a concrete slab tonight. Both truths existed simultaneously, and neither canceled the other. The judge dismissed the court, people stood, chairs scraped. The bailiff opened the side door, and the ordinary noise of a public building rushed in: footsteps, a ringing phone, someone laughing in a distant hallway. The smell of floor wax and old paper mixed with the cold air from the corridor. I walked toward the exit. The courtroom door opened into a long hallway, institutional tile, fluorescent lights, the kind of architecture designed to process people rather than comfort them. I counted the steps without meaning to. 47 from the courtroom door to the main exit measured the way I used to measure any distance that mattered, converting feeling into structure because structure was the only language I trusted. Griffin was standing near the exit with his attorney. He saw me coming. He straightened. His mouth opened, and his hand came up, not a wave, not a gesture, just a half-raised palm that might have been a greeting or a plea or the beginning of something he couldn't finish. Dad. Barely audible. I walked past without turning my head, without slowing, without acknowledgement. I heard him. I kept walking. Some bridges you don't rebuild. You mark them condemned, and you walk the long way around for the rest of your life. Elaine followed me through the courthouse doors. March sunlight hit my face, thin and sharp, and I tasted the cold metallic air of early spring in the Lehigh Valley. Murray was waiting at the bottom of the steps, hands in his coat pockets, watching me descend. "It's done, Virgil," he said quietly. "No, it's just starting." Murray reached into his coat and handed me an envelope. Cream-colored, unsealed. My name written on the front in handwriting that wasn't quite steady but was unmistakably Leona's, dictated to Nadine that morning while I was in court. I opened the flap and read the first line. "I knew before you did. I just couldn't say it." I folded the letter and slid it into my breast pocket. Not yet. The rest could wait until I was home. The letter sat in my breast pocket like a second heartbeat all the way down the courthouse steps. I knew before you did. 6 words that rearranged everything I thought I understood about the last 3 months. But the rest of the letter would have to wait. Because Corinne Whitaker was standing by the parking meters with a manila folder and the expression of a woman who hadn't come to offer condolences. Corinne was the only person I knew who waited outside a courthouse with a therapy proposal instead of sympathy. She fell into step beside me as Murray and Elaine headed toward their cars. And she didn't ask about the sentencing. She asked about Leona. "I've been researching augmentative communication protocols," she said, opening the folder as we walked. "Specifically for stroke patients with intact cognition but limited motor output. There's a structured system eye-blink protocol. 1 blink, yes. 2 blinks, no. Simple, reliable, and it works with patients who have far less function than Leona has right now." I stopped walking. "You think she can do that?" "I think she's been doing it." Corinne closed the folder and looked at me directly. The hand squeezes, the lip movements, the way her eyes track conversation. Those weren't reflexes. Those were attempts to communicate that nobody built a framework around. Everyone assumed she was beyond reach. Nobody asked her. I want to ask her. I spent 40 years designing communication systems between bridge components. Load sensors embedded in concrete, strand gauges bolted to steel cables. Vibration monitors that translated invisible stress into readable data. I built systems that let structures tell engineers what they needed before the engineers could see it themselves. And I never once thought to build one for my own wife. The realization landed like a drop beam, heavy, final, echoing. "When?" I said. "I've already submitted the protocol request to the rehabilitation center. We can start in 2 weeks if you consent." I consented before she finished the sentence. The 2 weeks passed the way time passes when you're waiting for something that might change everything, slow on the clock, fast in the body. I read to Leona every evening. I told her about the sentencing without softening it. I told her the assets were protected, that the fraudulent documents were voided, that Griffin couldn't contact her without a court order. She listened with those clear, tracking eyes, and I deployed for blinks that might already be answers, but I didn't want to impose a system Corinne hadn't calibrated yet. I wanted it done right. The therapy room at Lehigh Valley Rehabilitation Center smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Corinne had arranged the space carefully. Leona's wheelchair positioned near the window for natural light, a small table with a clipboard, 2 chairs for observers. I sat in the one closest to the door because my legs weren't trustworthy. Corinne knelt in front of Leona, eye level, close enough that there could be no ambiguity. "Leona, I'm going to ask you some questions. If the answer is yes, blink once and hold it for a full second. If the answer is no, blink twice. Do you understand?" Leona's eyelids closed. One blink, slow, deliberate, held for a full second before reopening. Unmistakable. I stopped breathing. The room contracted to the space between her eyelids and my face. My hands gripped the chair arms hard enough to whiten my knuckles, and I tasted the metallic surge of adrenaline at the back of my tongue. "Leona, can you hear us clearly?" One blink. "Do you know where you are?" One blink. "Do you know who this is?" Corinne gestured toward me. One blink. Faster this time, almost impatient, as if the question itself was an insult. Of course she knew. She had said my name weeks ago. She had written me a letter. She had been in there the entire time, conscious behind a wall that nobody thought to knock on. How long has she been able to do this? My voice broke on the word long. I didn't try to control it. Corinne watched Leona's response pattern for a moment before answering. Based on her response latency and consistency weeks, possibly since before the arrest. Since before the arrest. That meant she was aware when Griffin visited, aware when he argued with me in the living room, aware when he cycled through his phases of manipulation 2 floors below her bedroom, aware, possibly, during the months of sedation itself, conscious behind the chemical wall he'd built around her, hearing everything, understanding everything, unable to respond because the drugs he was feeding her had locked her motor functions while leaving her cognition intact. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. Corinne leaned forward again. "Leona, one more question for today. Did you know what was happening to you?" One blink. Slow, deliberate, the longest hold yet, nearly 2 full seconds, as if she wanted to make sure there was no possibility of misinterpretation. Then Leona's eyes shifted. Not to me, not to Corinne, to the door. She stared at the closed therapy room door for 3 seconds with an expression I recognized from decades of marriage but had never seen in this context. She was checking whether someone might be listening. It was a habit. The kind of habit formed not in weeks but in months. The reflex of a woman who had learned under her own son's care that being heard was dangerous. That night, alone in my study with the desk lamp on, I finally read the rest of Leona's letter. "I knew before you did. I just couldn't say it. The night before my stroke, I heard him on the phone talking about a trust in our name. I told myself I was imagining things. I have been trying to tell you every day since with every blink, every squeeze of your hand. Thank you for finally listening." I folded the pages along their original creases and sat for a long time with my hand pressed flat against the desk. Understanding at last that her silence had never been absence, it had been a message I was only now learning to read. Corinne spent the following weeks teaching me how to read Leona's fear. The door checking wasn't random. It spiked at certain hours, the hours Griffin used to visit, as if her body kept a schedule her mind was trying to overwrite. We worked around it. We built safety into the room the way I used to build redundancy into load-bearing systems, multiple supports, no single point of failure. By April, Leona stopped checking the door. By May, she started checking the alphabet board instead. The board hung beside her bed on a simple hook. 26 letters, 10 digits, and a row of common words printed on laminated cardboard. It was the most important piece of engineering I had ever seen, and I didn't build it. Corinne designed it, Nadine laminated it. A rehab aide, whose name I never learned, mounted it at the precise angle where Leona's eyes could reach every letter without straining her neck. 4 people collaborated on a communication system for a woman the medical establishment had nearly written off. And not one of them was a 67-year-old bridge engineer who should have thought of it first. I arrived every morning at 8. Same parking spot, same hallway, same door, third on the left, the one with the window that caught eastern light until about 10:30. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Nadine brought the lavender every Tuesday in a small ceramic vase she'd found at a thrift store, and when Corinne asked Leona whether she wanted it to continue, Leona blinked once without hesitation. The routine was simple and sacred. I pulled my chair to the left side of the bed, angled the board toward her line of sight, and pointed to letters 1 row at a time. When my finger reached the letter she wanted, she blinked. I wrote it down. Then the next letter, and the next. Building words the way bridge cables are tensioned 1 strand at a time, each one bearing more weight than it appears to carry. It took her 14 minutes to spell a sentence. I would have waited 14 years. Every bridge I ever built was a communication system. 2 sides that couldn't reach each other alone, connected by steel and concrete and the patience to understand what each bank needed from the other. I designed those systems for rivers and highways and railway crossings, and I never recognized that the one most urgently needed was in my own house, between my own chair and my wife's bedside. That Tuesday morning in May, something was different. Leona's eyes were already on the board when I walked in, not waiting for me to position it, not waiting for the routine. She was looking at the letters with an intensity I hadn't seen before, focused, urgent, the way she used to look at a business proposal she'd already decided to sign. "You want to say something," I said. 1 blink, fast. I pulled my chair close and raised my hand to the board. First row, A through F. No blink. Second row, G through L. She blinked on I. I wrote it down. Started again. This time she waited for the 3rd row and blinked on R, then E, then M, then E again. Between the R and the second E, her eyes closed for 10 seconds. My heart seized. I sat perfectly still, my finger frozen on the board, every breath suspended. Then she opened her eyes and continued, unhurried, certain. M-B-E-R. I had "I remember" on the notepad. My hand was shaking. I went back to the board. She blinked on Y, then O, then U. I stared at the notepad. 3 words assembled over 11 minutes by a woman who had spent months locked inside her own body, sedated by her own son. And the message she chose to deliver when she finally had the means wasn't an accusation, or a plea, or a demand for justice. It this: "I remember you." Not "I remember what happened," not "I remember what he did." She remembered me, the man who sat beside her in the dark counting her breaths, the man who held her hand when the oxygen machine stopped and her lungs carried themselves, the man who whispered apologies she apparently heard every single time. Corinne stood in the doorway, the same doorway where she had whispered the first warning about the unlabeled capsules all those months ago. She was smiling. Not the professional encouragement of a clinician observing progress, something quieter, something personal. The expression of a woman watching 2 people find each other across a distance that should have been impossible. "She was never lost, Mr. Prescott," Corinne said quietly. "She was just waiting for someone to build the right bridge." I took Leona's hand, her fingers curled around mine stronger now, the grip of a woman who intended to hold on. The alphabet board caught afternoon light through the window and cast faint, letter-shaped shadows across the blanket. Outside, a car passed on the road below. Somewhere in the building a phone rang and stopped. The lavender on the nightstand released its scent into the warm air. If someone you love goes quiet, don't assume they have nothing to say. Build them a way to say it. Build it out of patience and presence and the willingness to sit in silence until the silence speaks back. "For 6 years I thought I'd lost you," I whispered. "Turns out I was the one who never truly listened." Leona blinked once. The bridge held. I spent 40 years building bridges for a living and never once thought to check the one crumbling inside my own family. I trusted my son, because that is what fathers do. I looked at him and saw the boy I raised, not the man he became. Don't make mistake. Don't let love blind you to the signs that someone you trust is quietly destroying the person you love most. This family drama taught me something I carry every single day. Silence is not peace. Silence is permission. When I finally spoke up, when I finally fought back, it was almost too late. If you sense something is wrong in your household, do not wait for proof to pile up the way I did. Act on the whisper before it becomes a scream. I believe God put me through this so I could stand here and tell you, protect the ones who cannot protect themselves, even when the threat wears a familiar face. That is the real lesson of this life story. That is the heart of every revenge story worth telling, not anger, but love refusing to stay quiet. If this storytelling moved you, if this dad's true revenge reminded you of someone in your life, or made you think twice about a situation you have been ignoring, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not already, subscribe so you never miss another life story like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and your heart mean more to me than you know. A quick reminder, certain details in this story were fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The message